The courthouse hallway was cold and gray, and my ex-wife, Karen, stood in front of the judge with her lawyer and said, "Your Honor, my ex-husband has been broke for years. He can barely afford his own rent, let alone pay child support." She didn't know I had just sold the patent for the lawnmower blade I designed in my garage on Maple Street, the one I worked on every night after my shift at the hardware store. That morning, the check had cleared for $340,000, and it was sitting in my bank account, and I had told no one, not even Rachel, the woman who had been my neighbor for 2 years and brought me soup when I was sick. Rachel was sitting in the back of the courtroom, her hands folded in her lap, wearing that simple blue dress she always wore on Thursdays, and she looked at me with quiet confidence, not worry. I had met Rachel a year after the divorce, when she moved into the house next door with her golden retriever, Buddy, and she had asked me to help her fix her porch light, which was a simple request that turned into 2 years of friendship. I had been married to Karen for 14 years, and when she left me for a man who sold real estate and drove a Mercedes, she took the house, the car, and most of my self-respect. She told me I was never going to amount to anything, that I was too comfortable in my small life, too content with my small dreams, and that she couldn't live with a man who had no ambition. Those words stayed with me like a splinter under my skin, and I carried them through every long shift at Ace Hardware, through every night in my tiny rental house, through every meal I ate alone. The judge looked at me and said, "Mr. Miller, do you have anything to say regarding your financial situation?" And I stood up and said, "Yes, Your Honor. I would like to submit Exhibit A copy of the patent sale agreement." Karen's face went pale, and her lawyer started shuffling papers. I handed the document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge, who read it slowly and then looked up with a raised eyebrow. The judge said, "Mr. Miller, this shows a patent sale for $340,000. Is this accurate?" And I said, "Yes, Your Honor. The check cleared this morning at 9:15 a.m. I looked at Karen and I said, "I wasn't broke, Karen. I was just quiet. There's a difference. You told me I had no ambition, so I found something that mattered, and I built it, one piece at a time, in my garage." She started to say something, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm, and I could see the shock and confusion in her eyes, because she had spent so many years believing I was nothing. The judge said, "Mr. Miller, you are in full compliance with your financial obligations, and I see no reason to alter the child support arrangement." And I nodded and thanked him and sat down. After the hearing, Karen caught up to me in the parking lot, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me say all of that in there and make a fool of myself?" I looked at her and I said, "You never asked. You didn't want to know. You just assumed I was the same man who couldn't keep up with your expectations, and I was done proving myself to you." Rachel was waiting for me at my car, and she didn't say anything at first. She just put her hand on my arm and said, "You okay?" And that was the first time I felt like someone actually cared about my answer. I said, "I think I am." And then we stood there in the parking lot, the sun setting behind the courthouse, and she said, "Let's go home." On the way back to Maple Street, she told me she had known about the patent for 2 months because she had seen the papers on my kitchen table, and I had told her about it one night while we were eating the chicken pot pie she had brought over. She said, "I knew you were going to be okay, Ryan. I never doubted that for a second, and I realized that she had been believing in me long before I believed in myself." According to Pew Research, approximately 2/3 of Americans who have divorced go on to remarry, but I wasn't thinking about statistics when I looked at Rachel in the passenger seat. I was thinking about the way she had fixed my porch light with me, the way she had shown up at my door with grilled cheese sandwiches when I had the flu, the way she always listened without judging. A few weeks later, Karen called me, and her voice was softer than I remembered, and she said, "I'm sorry, Ryan. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things." I told her that I appreciated her apology, and that I had moved on, and that I wasn't the same man she had left, because I had learned that real love is about showing up, not about being impressed. Rachel and I started driving to the lake every Sunday afternoon, and we would sit on the dock with our feet in the water, and she would tell me about her childhood in Ohio, and I would tell her about my dad's old hardware store. She told me she had been married once too, and that it had ended badly, but she had spent years learning to trust again, and she said, "It's okay to be careful, Ryan. It's okay to take your time." I said, "I'm not careful with you, Rachel. I'm just right. I feel like myself when I'm with you." And she smiled and said, "That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." According to studies, emotional well-being improves significantly after divorce for people who find supportive new relationships, and I was living proof of that truth every single day. We started having dinners together on Fridays, and then it became Thursdays and Fridays, and then it became almost every night, and I never got tired of her laugh or the way she hummed when she cooked. Karen called me one more time, and she asked if I was seeing someone, and I said, Yes, I am. She's kind and patient, and she makes me want to be a better person. Karen was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I'm glad for you, Ryan. I really am. And I believed her, because I had forgiven her a long time ago, and forgiveness was the only way to truly move forward. The theme is clear. You can choose kindness, even toward the people who hurt you, and real love is showing up, day after day, even on the days when it's hard. A year later, I proposed to Rachel in her garden, the one she had spent the spring planting with petunias and marigolds, and she said yes before I could even finish the question. We had the wedding in her backyard, just 20 people, and my mother cried, and Rachel's golden retriever was the ring bearer, and it was perfect because it was simple and true. I sold a second patent that year for a new type of tool handle, and I started a small business that employed 4 people, and I told them that hard work was the only secret to success. Karen sent me a card after the wedding, and it said, I'm proud of you, Ryan. I hope you're happy. And I put it in a drawer, and I didn't think about it again. I think about Rachel every morning when I wake up and see her face on the pillow next to mine, and I think about how I almost missed this because I was too busy believing I wasn't enough. But I am enough, and I always was, and I am grateful to the man in the garage with the lawnmower blade and the dreams that nobody else believed in. This is the story of how a patent changed my life, but really it was never about the money. It was about the moment I finally let myself be seen. I'm Ryan Miller, and I finally came home. Thank you for spending your time with Heartline Stories Truth. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more original stories about healing, second chances, and the quiet power of showing up. I called Rachel the night before the hearing, and I said, I'm nervous. And she said, Ryan, you've got nothing to be nervous about. You did the work. You earned this. I said, what if she says something that makes me doubt myself again? And Rachel said, she can't make you doubt yourself anymore. That's not her power. It's yours. That conversation stayed with me through the whole hearing, and when Karen said I was broke, I didn't feel small because Rachel had reminded me that I wasn't. Her voice was in my head, steady and warm, saying, you did the work, you earned this, and that was all I needed to stand up and tell the truth. After the hearing, we went to the diner on Main Street, and we shared a slice of apple pie with ice cream, and Rachel said, you handled that with grace. I said, I had a good teacher, and she laughed and said, you're the one who built the lawnmower blade, Ryan. I just brought you soup. I said, that's exactly what I needed, and I meant it, because sometimes the most important person is the one who shows up with soup. Rachel and I walked through the town square that evening, and I held her hand, and I thought about all the years I had spent feeling like I wasn't enough. I thought about the garage, the hours I spent alone, the nights I wondered if any of it would ever matter, and I realized that it all led me right here. Right to this moment, with this woman, in this town, with a patent check in my pocket and a future I had built from scratch. I think about the judge's words, Mr. Miller, you are in full compliance, and I realized that compliance was never the goal. The goal was to prove to myself that I could build something from nothing, and I did, with my own hands, in my own garage, on my own terms. Karen called me a few months after the hearing, and she said, I've been thinking about us, about what I said, about how I left. She said, I was young and scared, and I didn't know what I wanted. I made a mistake, Ryan. I treated you like you were small, and you were never small. I said, I forgive you, Karen. I moved on, and I hope you can do the same. And she said, I'm trying, and I believed her. That was the day I truly let go of the last piece of anger, because anger is a heavy thing to carry, and I had been carrying it for years. Rachel saw me that night, sitting on my porch, and she came over and sat beside me and said, You look lighter. I said, I am, and she put her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in the dark, watching the stars come out, and I didn't say anything else. That was the first night I told Rachel I loved her, not with words, but with the quiet way I held her hand, and she knew. She said, I love you too, Ryan. I have for a long time, and that was the easiest conversation I have ever had. We started planning our life together the next morning, and it didn't feel scary because we had already been practicing for years. Rachel showed me that love is not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It's about bringing soup and fixing porch lights and listening. It's about showing up, day after day, even when the days are ordinary, even when nothing special is happening. I used some of the patent money to pay off Rachel's mortgage because she had never asked me to, and I wanted to do something that mattered. She cried when I told her, and she said, You didn't have to do that. And I said, I know, I wanted to. A few months after that, I bought a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, and I asked Rachel to marry me in her garden. She said yes, and her golden retriever barked, and the neighbors came out to see what was happening, and we were surrounded by laughter and joy. We got married on a Saturday in June under an arbor of flowers that Rachel had grown herself, and I told her I would love her for the rest of my life. She said, "I know you will, Ryan." That's why I said yes, and I knew she was right. That's the kind of love I had been waiting for all along, the kind that doesn't need proof or patents or courtrooms. The kind that just is, steady and quiet, like the humming of a lawnmower blade in a garage on Maple Street. Karen sent me a text on my wedding day, and it said, "Congratulations, Ryan. You deserve this." I smiled and put my phone away. I didn't respond, because I didn't need to. I was standing at the altar with the woman I loved, and that was all that mattered. Rachel and I drove to the lake for our honeymoon, and we stayed in a small cabin with no internet and no cell service, just the two of us and the water. We spent the week swimming and hiking and talking, and I learned even more about her fears and her hopes and her dreams. She told me she had been afraid to love again after her first marriage, but she was glad she took the chance, because I had been worth it. I said, "You were worth it too, Rachel. You were always worth it," and she cried and laughed at the same time. When we got back from the lake, I went to the garage and looked at the workbench where I had built the lawnmower blade, and I felt grateful. Grateful for the hours I spent alone, grateful for the dreams that kept me going, grateful for the woman who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I hung the patent certificate on the wall of the garage, right next to a photograph of Rachel, because they both represented the best parts of my life. That night, I went inside and found Rachel cooking dinner, and she was humming the same song she always hummed, and I felt my heart swell. I said, "You know I love you, right?" And she said, "I know, Ryan. I love you too." And we ate dinner and talked about nothing important. That is what I had been missing all along. Not money, not recognition, not the approval of an ex-wife who never saw me. I had been missing the quiet moments, the shared meals, the ordinary days that become extraordinary when you're with the right person. According to research, second chances in love often lead to greater emotional fulfillment, and I was living proof that this was true. I am not the same man who stood in that courthouse, feeling small and invisible. I am the man who built something from nothing and found love along the way. Rachel tells me I'm the strongest person she knows, and I tell her she is the reason I learned to be that person. We have plans to travel, to see the mountains, to visit the ocean, to build a life that is ours, not defined by anyone else's expectations. I think about Karen sometimes, and I hope she has found the same peace I have, because no one deserves to carry bitterness forever. I forgave her a long time ago, and that forgiveness was not for her. It was for me, so I could finally be free. Rachel and I still go to the diner on Main Street, and we still share pie, and we still walk through the town square holding hands. Some things don't change, and I'm glad, because those are the things that matter most. I have a new patent application in the works, but I don't think about it as much as I think about Rachel. I think about the way she laughs, the way she hums, the way she always knows exactly what to say when I'm having a bad day. She is my partner, my best friend, my home, and I am never letting her go. I told her that once, and she said, "Good, because I'm not going anywhere," and I knew she meant it. We are building a life together one day at a time, one meal at a time, one conversation at a time. And it is everything I never knew I wanted. This is my second chance, and I am not wasting it. Thank you for spending your time with Heartline Stories Truth. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more original stories about healing, second chances, and the quiet power of showing up. I am Ryan Miller, and this is my story. The end. I want to thank Rachel for everything she has given me, for her patience, her kindness, her unwavering belief in me when I had none. I want to thank the town of Maple Street for being the place where I could start over, where I could build something new from the ashes of my old life. And I want to thank the version of myself who didn't give up, who kept working in that garage, who believed that something better was waiting. That version of me was right, and I am so glad I listened to him. This is not the story of a patent or a court case. It is the story of a man who finally learned to see himself clearly. And when he did, he found that he was more than enough. He was exactly what someone else was looking for. And that is the greatest vindication of all. Not revenge, not money, not proving anyone wrong. Just being seen, and loved, and chosen. That is what I got. And that is what I will carry with me forever. Rachel and I celebrate our anniversary by the lake every year, and we look back on the journey that brought us here. We think about the porch light, the soup, the patent, the court case, all the moments that led to this one. And we are grateful for every single one of them. I don't have any regrets because every struggle taught me something, and every loss led me closer to the life I have now. I learned that silence is not weakness, that patience is not failure, and that love is not something you find, it is something you build. I built my life with my own hands, and I built it with Rachel, and that is the only thing that matters. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that it's never too late to start again. It's never too late to find someone who sees you. And it's never too late to believe in yourself. I am proof of that. And so are you. This is Heartline Stories Truth, and we believe in second chances. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more original stories about family, resilience, healing, and second chances. We are honored to share this space with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. I am Ryan Miller, and I am home. The end. I wrote this story to remind myself that the hard times don't last, and that there is always hope on the other side. I wrote it to honor the people who showed up for me, especially Rachel, who never stopped believing. I wrote it to honor the man in the garage who didn't give up, even when the world told him he should. And I wrote it to honor you, the listener, who is looking for your own second chance. It is waiting for you. I promise. Thank you for spending your time with Heartline Stories Truth. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more original stories about healing, second chances, and the quiet power of showing up. This has been a Heartline Stories Truth original. All rights reserved. I am Ryan Miller. And I am finally, truly, at peace. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. And may you find your own second chance, just as I found mine.